Hi everybody, how we doing? I'm Dr. Nick, as the kids call me. Oh yeah, I guess I can't do that. Thank you. It's good to bring your partner with you. Keeps you in check. First of all, I want to acknowledge Mandy. The work you've done in a short period of time and the amount of learning and the passion with which you've taken this on is like awe-inspiring. So we've spent the last 3 days with Mandy, and every few hours she's like, God, I just hope I'm living up to your guys' standards. And I was thinking about it today, like I really hope our standards are living up to like your power and commitment. Like that's what this is about, is sharing it and getting other people to do the work that we've been doing for the last 15 years. So that being said, thank you for having us here, Mandy. You're like an amazing person and an inspiration. So thank you. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a little storytelling up here, kind of tell you the story of how we came to where we are now in our world and what fit learning is in very sort of general broad strokes. And then I'm gonna turn it over to Dr. Kim, and she's gonna kind of unpack that in a more technical way and show you some outcome data of the results that this methodology produces with kids. So our general mission that's kind of evolved over time as we have worked tirelessly with kids for almost 20 years now, is really to kind of transform education throughout the globe. And this is like a major step for us in accomplishing that mission. And when we started, you hear of like Apple being started in a garage. Well, we literally started in a broom closet, a janitor's closet in the education building of the University of Nevada, Reno, with rickety lights and a cruddy old table and no carpet, and just with faculty kids. So we had some of our colleagues, our graduate school colleagues, had started it, but they quickly kind of ran away from it, and we were like, okay, we're going to take that program for you. We want to work with, take behavior analysis as the science of learning, kind of understanding the conditions under which human beings learn best. We want to apply that to working with kids and educational populations. So we graduated from a broom closet to the basement of a nursing building with like shag carpet that was that high and probably hadn't been washed since the 70s, to eventually where we privatized. We upset a few people, especially in the education department, because we were starting to produce these results with kids, and they had a tutoring program there, and kids were leaving the tutoring program, but they had all of the dollars at the university, and so we were forced off and we privatized. That being said, so when we privatized, we had 10 kids, one center in Reno, Nevada. Now there are 4 operational fit learnings, and we've just started our affiliate model, and Mandy is one of our very first people that we're starting to share this with. I have a few other notes here that I wanted to bring up. So in that, I want to just get like a quick survey of who's here. Do we have any, I know you have a few teachers here. Any behavior analysts? I know in the back of the room there are. Other sort of professionals working with kids? All right, awesome. And parents? Got some parents here? All right, awesome. So to the teachers, I'm gonna point out some things that we see as problems in education. We value teachers, feel that teachers are the most important cog, like most important part of society. This is not about teachers, it's about a bigger systems issue inside of at least the American educational system. And I'm assuming from what I've spoken with about Mandy that a lot of the same problems exist here. So without further ado, what are some of the problems in the educational system? Starting with the number one problem is underpaid, overworked, overcrowded teachers with overcrowded classrooms. That's, in America, it's just not a valued position. In countries where teaching is a highly paid, respected position, you're getting much better educational outcomes than you are in countries where that's not a value. Apparently in America, we value our military. I don't know what the number is now, but our spending on our military is 10, 15, 20 times more than we spend on education, yet our kids' future is probably the most important investment we can make. Inside of traditional education, there's a problem of the mix-up over content versus competency. So when I say content, we tend to think that by creating these really fancy textbooks and these elaborate lines of curriculum and exposing kids to those without assuring that they've actually learned all those things that are in there, no matter how well thought out it is, that we've done our job. And in fact, if you go into some educational journals, the research that's published, a lot of them are checklists of whether or not teachers arrange their environment correctly according to the curriculum, with not one bit of student data being measured, not one student outcome being presented in those. And they're validating these curriculum lines based upon usability, not necessarily student outcomes. So there's a bit of a problem there. Another problem is that this curriculum gets confused with instruction. We tend to think that by, well, I did my checklist, I ran this lesson, and when you have overcrowded classrooms, you have no choice but to do that and just hope that you can reach those kids and be able to take the time out necessary if you've got a kid that's falling behind, but there's no real sensitivity to instruction when you're presenting to a group. It's like, imagine if you took your kid to the pediatrician's office and he or she got in a room with 20 other kids, and the pediatrician took a look. Okay, on average, kind of generally, we got the flu here, and then recommended treatment based on that. But as you know, you have kids. Every kid is different. Every kid learns at their own pace, at their own rate. Some things come easier, some things come harder. And when you're just presenting curriculum and going through lessons without really making sure that instruction has occurred and they've actually contacted and practiced and learned that particular item, kids are going to fall through the cracks. Now I'm going to ask a somewhat rhetorical question, and if someone's heard me ask this before, don't answer. That leads into the next problem. Does anyone know what criteria we use in schools to advance a kid from one grade to the next? What test, what sort of metric is used? Does anyone know?
I thought it was age.
Birthday. There it is, birthday. Is that your mom? Of course it is. Birthday, right? Now, that doesn't mean that the kids have learned it. I mean, in the States, you get one chance to get held back, but you get moved on, and the curriculum goes ahead. And it gets harder, and it's dependent upon everything that was supposed to be learned in the first grade. And so by the time kids get to third or fourth grade, teachers are handicapped because they've got such a wide dispersal of skill ability in the classroom, and kids begin to fall off the map. In the States, that kind of happens around the fourth grade, where there's sort of really huge curriculum leaps that magnify that advancement by age problem. And then inside of that, another problem is insufficient monitoring. So we use, my kid goes to kind of a frou-frou shishi private school in the States, and he's in the fourth grade, and his report card is excellent, satisfactory, needs improvement, 1 for good effort, 2 for medium effort, and 3 for needs to put forth more effort. Well, that's not telling you anything about what he's doing. That gives you no sense of the skills that he's supposed to be learning. There's no way to go in and create intervention. We use standardized tests. I think I heard it's once every 2 years here. Is that right? We use it once every year. Now, these are important, but they're global measures that don't tell you specifically what's going on and what skills kids need to have and how well they're performing those individual skills. While it may give you a sense of where they're at relative to their peers, it doesn't really tell you, like, okay, my kid's in the 30th percentile, what do I do to fix that? These standardized tests don't do it. They're big, gross global measures, and they're one-time snapshots that don't allow, that can have a lot of other variability that occurs that influences the score. Like, I clearly remember when I think it was third grade, one of our standardized tests is called the ERBs. And I remember noticing that my friend Johnny, who had finished the test before me, got to go out to recess. Right? And I was like, oh, finish test, go to recess. B, C, B, A, D. Tried to make one of my rows look like a surfboard, another one like a Christmas tree, and I was out to recess. And so this raised huge alarms. My parents were like, what has happened to your reading comprehension? Your math is awful. Are you like big fire? Got called into the principal's office, started getting all this extra help. And I was like, oh, no, I just wanted to go to recess. So these large standardized tests, while They may help us evaluate where the child fits inside of relative to their peers. It doesn't really tell us anything specific about what they need. So what happens is, and I think you said you're teaching like this 6 years, is that what we call it here, 6th grade. You get these cumulative skills deficits. Kid gets moved on from one grade to the next, to the next, to the next. And if they haven't mastered some skills early on, those core early skills, you've got this sort of cumulative skill deficits that really rears its ugly head. And we see this a lot, like it's just glaringly obvious in math when kids start doing multi-digit computation. Like all the skills that kids need to be proficient at and competent at are, you have to be able to read numbers, write numbers, understand place value, round, estimate, add, subtract, multiply, divide. If any one of those skills is weak, it makes learning just long division or multi-digit multiplication hard. And if you're slow, that makes it even harder. You're fighting over things that you shouldn't be fighting over at that point. And so when kids get progressed in the grade levels and they're not able to perform at high proficiency rates, you get these things that start cropping up that look like learning disabilities, but it's really, they're just practicing doing things really poorly. Like I know somewhere around the 6th grade, I started really working hard at not being noticed in class because I didn't want to get called on, because I'd been advanced from one grade to the next and had these skill deficits. I didn't want to raise my hand and get a question wrong, so I knew how to look like I was really attending. And then I also knew when the teacher was about to ask me a question and I'd start writing in my book, looking like I was saying something important, like what he or she had said was the most important thing in the world. And I spent my time in the classroom like working really hard at just barely getting noticed. Not enough to get called on, just enough to get avoided. And I got really good at it. And I got really good at not attending to what mattered. And what happens in that situation, when you're performing poorly, your confidence gets battered. We get kids that come to our centers that, they're in 5th or 6th grade or 6th year, and they're reading at a year 1 level. And they're being asked to read really intense, big chunks of text. And they're doing that all day long, and they're struggling with that. And you do something that you suck at all day, you're not going to feel good about yourself. And so kids come, like they'll walk into our office during their first couple of sessions, just like literally battered because of this one little problem. And then what's happened, and I don't know if we've noticed this in our culture, we start pathologizing these problems. Well, the child's dyslexic. The child's got attention deficit disorder. We start making up new ones to describe these problems that are cropping up in the classroom, like auditory processing disorder, central auditory processing disorder, nonverbal language delay or language disorder. Of course, there are kids that come out of the womb and there's a range of ability, and some kids learn it in different environments differently. But a lot of these we're seeing, these are just learned behaviors. Like take dyslexia, for example, and you've got little Johnny, and he's in circle time in kindergarten, and the teacher's like, okay, everybody, this is a B, and everyone goes, or what? And she goes, what letter is this? And everyone says B, and Johnny says D. Kind of sounds like B, and the teacher's like, great job, everybody. Well, he's just had one trial of calling a B a D and thinks he got it right without any feedback. And so now he just does it again and again without feedback. They just get really good at flipping letters. And we find that just simple discrimination training on STEM letters removes a lot of the characteristics of dyslexia. All right, and if you remember the measurement and the lack of a systematic standardized measurement of skills being a problem, we have sort of no accountability in being able to fix these problems. We can't see specifically what's going on when a kid's struggling in school. Veteran teachers that have been with kids for a while kind of begin to pick up and understand, like, oh, I've seen Johnny, he looks like Sally, who I had 2 years ago, and this was something really helpful, but it's not very precise. It's based upon individual experience, and there's no real transferability to other teachers, and there's no rapid acquisition of that skill for teachers. Okay, so it fit. What we do is we start with concept instruction, okay, kids understanding and fluid with concepts, and then we do fluency building. So generally in the classrooms, at least in the States, if you picture sort of a pie graph, this much time in class is spent practicing skills, and the rest of the time is spent around concept instruction and maybe independent work. Well, we flip that pie, we invert that pie. At FIT, we do 80 to 90% practicing of skills and getting good at skills, and 10% of concept instruction. We teach the concept, make sure the kids get really profoundly good at the concept, and then get fluent at executing that concept. And we call the sort of result that practice produces cognitive fitness. All right. So you start, if you go down here, you start with accuracy, move to mastery of the skill, start training kids to be more flexible. And what we see is you get massive generalizations if you take the time to build those core skills to levels of automaticity that produces generalization into the classroom, into their lives, and produces more global progress for kids that show up to school confident, ready to learn. It doesn't matter if their best friend is sitting next to them or not. Like, I know, for example, in 8th grade, Mrs. Gilmore's history class, I used to sit next to my best friend, this guy Chad, and he was a big guy. We called him Barrel because he's just big. Everything he did was big. He breathed heavy, he had big allergies, so like always sneezing, blew his nose like a foghorn, tapped his foot, was a pencil tapper, you know, like that guy. And so I remember sitting next to him in tests and hating him. Like, he drove me crazy. But then there was this one test that I really studied for and was really prepared for, and I handed in my test and I go back to my seat and I see the usual pile of Kleenex. I see him tapping his foot, breathing heavily, sneezing. And I was like, I didn't even know he was there the whole time, because I'd mastered the concept and was able to execute in the moment. What we got next here? So our method is a combination of applied behavior analysis. So taking the principles gleaned from a natural science of behavior and applying it to educational problems. Of that, more specifically, is precision teaching, which really is just a standard measurement system that allows us to isolate skills and see if what we're doing is working. There's no cookie cutter model for every kid, and so we have tremendous accountability to be able to adjust. I've got one more slide. Got it. To be able to adjust to a learner. Oh, got it. Yep. Direct instruction. That's right. You're going. Yep. And then curriculum-based measurement, which allows us to monitor more global progress and hold us accountable to the outcomes that we're producing with kids. And so over the last 15 years, since 1998, once more. Yeah, well, we privatized 10 years ago. We've developed fully elaborated lines on reading, phonemic awareness, language and cognition, grammar, written expression, and basic through advanced math. So that's like basic number sense all the way through Algebra 1. And then Dr. Kim, actually I'm gonna go a little off script here. None of this would be possible without like the drive, passion, and commitment to kids that you display on a daily basis. Like, it's amazing, it's an honor to like work with her every day. She's like the best. She is committed so authentically to each and every child that walks through our door, and that transmits to the culture. I see it in Mandy's office when we go there. Everyone that's working for her right now is just impeccable and shares that commitment. It just flows. So nothing would be possible without you. And now I'll let you take over and do your thing.
Thanks, Dave. Sorry to rush you.
Yeah, that's all right.
I just have like so much to go. Thank you. And I also want to thank Mandy for having us here. It's been really awesome. And you know, when we stood inside, you know, a 10-year vision a year ago, and our 10-year vision was, you know, expanding our model outside the United States and having, you know, more of a presence internationally. And then all of a sudden, a year later, here we are in Australia. So it's so interesting when you kind of stand inside what you want to create in an organization, and all of a sudden it occurs because of people like Mandy who take on big things and are up to big games, and that's what we're up to too. So, okay, so now I have to get into the nitty-gritty of how this all happens. So why, you know, have we been able to discover all the things we've been able to discover about component skills and learn, you know, in core academic areas, and what are essential things that kids have to know at profound levels of mastery for them to be useful and meaningful with respect to building upon to develop more complex repertoires. Like, how is that possible? Well, it's only possible through measurement of behavior, the way we measure it. We're out of a tradition of natural science, so we're not out of education. Another commitment we have is, in our future, marrying the colleges of education with, the behavioral analysis programs, because if there's any field that should be informing teacher training, it should be the field of learning science, right? I mean, the people who know the principles of learning and how you arrange instructional environments according to principles or laws about how human beings have evolved to learn. And it's not up for debate. I mean, there's 100 years of research now on how human beings learn, and how, to be honest with you, biology plays a role. Like, people are born with biological, predispositions to things. But the moment a child is in an environment, that environment assumes a primary role. And just that understanding would change the world inside of education. That understanding that regardless of a child's diagnosis, that the environment is primary inside of what's occurring for that kid. Whether or not they're not talking, they're not reading, they're not doing math, the environment plays a primary role in why that's occurring, not the child. And getting that is a huge, that is a breakthrough inside of being powerful as an educator. And so one of my commitments is speaking to teachers. We have affiliate faculty positions in the education department at a university in New York instead of the behavior analysis program, because it's my commitment that teachers are armed with those powerful tools. Because there's a lot of teachers who feel helpless, and they are. They're helpless because their training hasn't produced the kind of understanding of how to effectively arrange learning environments so that every single child achieves mastery in skill areas that they need to have. Now, it may not be at the same pace, it may not be at the same time, it may not look the same, but every kid can master core skills. And that understanding is so important for the future of our planet. So it starts with measurement, and that's what precision teaching actually is. And that's, those of you who aren't in behavior analysis, has anybody even heard of precision teaching before in here besides the behavior analysis people we've been training all week? Okay, great, fine. So precision teaching is actually a system of measurement. That's all it is. And my mentor, who actually founded this, was Ogden Lindsley. And you can look him up, but he is highly published. He was a student of B.F. Skinner's. And I was lucky enough to have him as a mentor to me during my doctoral work. And he wanted to put in the hands of teachers the same scientific tools that B.F. Skinner used in his laboratory to actually discover the principles of learning. And the principles of learning that he discovered were through these tools that Og turned into a tool to give to teachers. So he did this in the 60s and 70s. And so, that was his commitment. So it's really giving teachers a way to measure behavior so that they weren't blind to what's going on with their learners. And that they could actually understand learners at the individual level and make powerful instructional decisions so that every child made exceptional progress. So that was his commitment. So again, like I said, our origins are in natural science. So I know that sounds kind of scary. Like, what does that even mean? Like biology is a natural science, physics is a natural science, chemistry is a natural science, right? So all that really means is, rather than our understanding of our phenomena being based on, subjective opinions, or more kind of global research studies, looking at thousands of people at once, natural science looks at the individual. So it's either the individual cell dividing, right? Or one chemical reaction, or one instance of behavior performed by one kid. So it's really, to be honest with you, also known as the science, our field is known as the science of individual differences, and no one really understands that. People think that behavior analysis is this really scary field of robots trying to control people. But actually, we're the science that understands the differences that individuals have as a function of their individual environments. Because not one person has the same history, has the same environment that they've come from. Not even siblings in the same house have the same experience. And we actually have a science that lets us understand that and use it to our advantage to solve problems for every kid. So it's not based on big numbers of people, it's based on the individual person and measuring their behavior on an individual level. So that's the importance of it, with respect to natural science. All right, so I already said all that. So, and again, I didn't know quite how to prepare for this presentation. I thought I knew it was going to be a mixture of people in the audience, but we definitely don't have as many behavior analysts in here as I thought we would. So I might skip over some things that I think aren't as relevant, like maybe this, because when we talk about how we measure, behavior in precision teaching and really in behavior analysis more specifically. We like to talk about dimensional units of behavior, and what that simply means is we measure what we can see, okay? What we can see with the naked eye, not a rating scale, an opinion, a subjective conversation. We measure not a feeling that you can't really see inside, or I've never once met, and I've been doing this work for a really long time, and I have transformed the reading repertoires of countless kids with dyslexia diagnoses, and not once did I do that by measuring their dyslexia in their brain somewhere. I did it by measuring their reading behavior, right? So I did it by measuring number of instances of letter reversals versus number of instances of correct letter reading responses. That's how you fix it. And you reinforce the correct ones and correct the non-correct ones. Instead of somehow sticking an electrode in a kid's brain and finding the dyslexia somewhere in there. That doesn't produce any kind of effective action. So when we talk about dimensional units, it means we're looking at something and measuring it directly. So I'm going to skip over some of those weird, crazy terms like rate and latency. We'll get to that last. So one of the, we talk about kind of some of the problems happening in education is also kind of how things are measured. So, and I'm going to get into this more with respect to fluency, but the most common measure, if it's not like 1, 2, 3, or E for effort, is percent correct, right? So that's a really common one. So what'd you get on the test? An 80%. What'd you get on the test? A 90%. And these are actually in our field kind of known as what we call dimensionless units, because I can't have a kid go up to the board and show me 80%. Right? I could start a timer and say, show me 10 math facts a minute, but I can't really have them show me 80%. I can't see that, it's an abstraction. Another problem with that is you have two learners, both get 100% correct on a test, one finishes it in 10 minutes, and one takes a whole hour. Those are very different learners, but because we're not looking at time, we miss that. And every time you miss a variable that is impacting a child's learning, you're in trouble because you're losing power to make a difference, right? You're taking away an opportunity for you to see an important factor that's impacting that child's ability to learn and perform. So that kind of is what, what precision teaching is all about, is using, and I'm going to probably skip over this part too. I'll show you, is using a powerful tool that lets us see exactly what's going on with a learner. That's why it's called precision teaching. It's precise. It lets us see everything. So this is the scary blue chart that we use, and we measure every single thing a kid, if you come down to Mandy's lab, and they're called learning labs because of the amount of data and observations we make with kids, we make more profound discoveries about learning than would happen in a basic, controlled laboratory setting. It's really like a lab, because it allows us to analyze every single thing that's impacting a child's performance on a specific task and make changes if we don't like the way it's going. So we use this crazy chart. It's blue, you can't really see it once. It lets us look at things that happen as infrequently as once a day and as fast as 1,000 times a minute, which is so cool because we use this one thing. And so if we have a kid who flops out of his chair a few times a session, we can chart it on this thing, and if we have a kid who's reading at 200 words a minute, which all of our kids eventually can achieve, we can chart it on this thing. So it's the same chart for everything we want to look at. And what it lets us see is rates of change. So if we, each one of these lines, we have a data point on for each, these are consecutive calendar days along the bottom here. Okay, so down here we got, days going across, right? So this is set up for an entire school semester, which is cool. So for entire school semester, you have one chart for, let's say this might be reading words, let's just say. So like a kid reading words. And so, every time we measure his count per minute, which is what we measure, of reading words, we drop a little data point on here, and then we can draw these really cool trend lines and see his rate of change. Okay, so these are called acceleration lines. All right, acceleration is actually an index of learning. It's a technical, science-based index of learning. And learning is change over time. Like you can't know learning in one instance. Learning happens over time, right? So this gives us like ideas. So this would be like a ×2 kid, and so this means he's multiplying by 2, right? So one of the reasons this chart's amazing is because it's based in multiplication and division. And you know why? Because what we also know is that behavior multiplies. It doesn't add. That's another thing we know about learning, which is so like amazing to understand. Behavior doesn't add itself, it multiplies itself, which is why when you're doing something right, it's so cool because you can actually like exponentially multiply a kid's performance from Monday to Friday. You can imagine getting ×2 better on something from Monday to Friday. And what if every kid did in school? Like what if they multiplied by 2 their reading rate every week of the school year? Like that'd be amazing. Think about how fast they'd be reading by the end of the year, right? So we know that all natural phenomenon in the world, on the planet, multiplies. Cancer cells, unfortunately, do not add, they multiply. And they divide with effective treatment, but they multiply, sadly. All organic phenomenon multiplies and human behavior multiplies. So for us to understand learning, we have to look at it on a chart that has multiplication as its mathematical model. So this allows us to predict where a kid's gonna be from week to week. And if we don't like it, we can do something and make it go faster based on the principles of behavior. So like that'd be a kid who's ×2ing, which is awesome. No, that's even more awesome. That's a kid who's ×4ing, which we get a lot of, right? But what we know, which is awesome, because Og Lindsley was so brilliant, he did a lot of tests, and we found out that if you get a ×2 on a chart like this in a week, that's a statistically significant and clinically significant amount of behavior change, which means that, like on a stat, it's like a 0.000000001 chance, one probability it was by chance, like rather than a function of your intervention, and that everyone in the world notices. Like parents come in, what the heck happened to Johnny? He was in the car today reading signs, and we went to dinner and he was reading the menu, and he's never done that in his life. We're like, oh yeah, we could have told you he was gonna do that. He had a ×2 on his, on all his charts last week. So that's cool. Like that's not surprising, but cool that you noticed it. So, in our science, when we use visual inspection like this to evaluate our phenomenon, we better trust our tool, right? And we really can trust this. Because if I'm seeing that kind of rate of change on that chart, I know I'm doing the right thing. And if I don't have it, then I know I got to fix it. And that's my job. It's accountability. It's like, that's my job. Like how many parents have had, a kid, a child struggling, this happens to me all the time, in school, and you get a call or email, he's really struggling with his math facts. He's really struggling in math. Right? Like, I'm calling to inform you that your child's struggling in my math class. Like as if, you better do something about this. Right? In what other industry would that ever happen? Like we take our car to the shop and we get a call and the guy goes, your car is making this really annoying rattling noise. It's annoying. It's like I'm driving it, test driving it like you asked me, and it's rattling. You got to come pick up this car. You got to do something about it. I can't deal with the rattling of this car. That's funny. It happens every day in schools, every day. Somehow it's the parents' job to get their kids fluent in math facts, right? Something weird. Because there's no other option. Because teachers don't know how to fix it and they're not supported. The system doesn't support it because, and a lot of teachers know, they got to get their math facts, but I'm supposed to move on tomorrow to this, to the 3rd unit of decimals. And half my class can't even add. But they're doing decimals this week. They had to forget asking about fractions, but we're going on to decimals. It just makes no sense. So they can't fix it, and so what else can they do but call the parents, right? Or refer them to special services or whatever happens. So anyway, we don't do that because we have tools like this to help us and the principles of science behind us. So then it lets us look at other things like stability. So like when you have a kid coming in and they're all bouncy like this, we know that they're on a good path, but we got to get them hitting their mark every time. We also know that this chart lets us predict things about the future, which it does. That's the benefit of this kind of a chart. So that we can say, okay, he's on this trajectory, let's extend it out because I want him to pass this program. I want him to be masterful at this in a week. Is he gonna get there on this path? Okay, he's not. So let's do something to make him move faster on this week. So prediction, which is what we need to be doing. Okay, I can skip this, because this is really for the behavior analysts in the audience. I mean, I'll tell you, but a lot of other kinds of people who do graphing look at graphs like this, where you're adding. This is why we don't add, because this is like adding instead of multiplying up the scale. So this is a times, this is a times 2 change, and so is that. That's the problem with adding as a mathematical model. Like the higher you get, the bigger it looks, but it's not real. It's just based on your scale.
So would this be an example of a cumulative graph?
This is not a cumulative graph.
Okay.
The one I showed you would be more similar to like a cumulative record. This is kind of a made up graph, but this is what a lot of more traditional ABA people use, unfortunately. Okay, so I'm going to get past all this. Okay, so here we go. I'm moving. Sorry. Okay. So because we've used this kind of chart and this kind of measurement system for years, not just us, but people who do this, a lot of discoveries have been made. So one of the most important ones is the notion of component-composite relationships. So, and not just like everybody gets this, like teach first things first. Like we wouldn't expect a first grader to do algebra, right? Like it's kind of like that's common sense. But it's not just that, it's knowing how well kids have to know it. It's not just like exposing kids to something, it's like mastering it at a fundamental level so that you get this almost like generative, not almost, it's this generative ability to do complex things with very little practice. So like that's what we see all the time, and I'm going to show you some data at the end to support it. Oh my God, I'm almost out of time already. Yikes. Okay. To show you some data to support it. But if teachers in schools really got this, they'd realize how much time is wasted teaching things that kids have no business learning yet. And spending the time to get kids fluent at core skills, and then by 4th grade, it'd be a breeze. Kids would be basically teaching themselves. But that doesn't happen. So kids get exposed to all this stuff and moved along, and all that happens is trying to solve problems and put out fires and get kids to survive. Just survival at this point. It's a basic survival by that point for most kids. 80% of kids in the United States need tutoring. 80%. That's crazy. They can't make it with just being in class. Something's wrong. Okay, so that gets us to what functional mastery means. So it's not like, okay, you got 90% means it's mastered, because I promise you, my daughter will make an A on a test 2 weeks later. So you remember what are the 3 different types of clouds? It was one of this cloud test. What? I don't know. I'm like, well, didn't you get an A on that test? Well, yes, but that was 2 weeks ago. I don't remember what those clouds were, right? What's the point of that? What is the point of studying for something really hard, getting an A, and then having it just be evaporated from your memory, right? It's a waste. So what we know about mastery is that if you want a kid, and this is what our commitment is, we don't want to just look like we're cool because we teach kids stuff. That's not what we care about. We don't care about looking like we're teaching kids lots of stuff. We like to teach kids stuff that they never forget, ever. Like they can do it backwards, forwards, upside down, with tons of noise happening, with people shouting, when they're cold, when they're hot, when they have to pee, when they're hungry, when they're sick, they can do it, right? That's what mastery is. Expert, effortless, automatic, you don't forget it. If I moved to Tanzania and never drove a car for 2 years, and I came home, I'd drive a car, right? Well, you can also produce that with academic areas when kids really master stuff. It's what we know about what happens with neurosynaptic transmissions and practice and reinforcement in the environment. It's a symbiotic relationship between those things. And that's the only way something's stored in long-term memory. But that takes a lot of practice. And kids don't get that practice anymore. They're just getting exposed to new things all the time. So, we talk about, and of course this is now like a term that is used in the vernacular all the time. Hang on. That's yours again. I'm gonna get a sore throat. I just drank your seltzer again. Okay, so fluency, like everybody knows what fluency means, right? Like if you're fluent in a second language, you can speak it effortlessly, right? Well, fluency is actually a technical term in precision teaching in our field. And it means something. It's like a measurable level of mastery that predicts three things, okay? And I'm going to talk about what those three things are. And because when we find that level of mastery that produces those three things that we're going to talk about, that's when we know we've hit an aim. Okay, so we've hit like a level, like a level of count in time with accuracy that is considered to be like the level of mastery that we want to have. So it's like an aim. That's what aims are. And that's what we build all of our kids to at FIT and at Cognilab now, our aims. And they're not made up. They're not because I think it's cool for kids to do 50 math facts a minute. And that's what our kids do. They end up doing over 50 math facts a minute, which is almost one a second, which is a beautiful thing to watch, and you will see. It's not because we think it's cool. It's because it actually means this. And these are called REAPs. And I'm going to talk about what those are. So REAPs, Alexia, accuracy, authenticity. Okay, we talked about this. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to go ahead here. All right, so REAPs. The first thing we know that fluency produces, which I just talked about before, is retention. So retention is actually another way of talking about memory. And we know, and it's, again, I'm not making this up, there is a symbiotic relationship between practice with reinforced responses, like you practice and you're paid off. You practice, you're paid off. You practice, you're paid off. That's also producing a permanent neural pathway in your brain. Those two things are interconnected. It doesn't happen by chance or by one try. Tennis players aren't like what the Aussie Open's going on right now. Leighton Hewitt didn't just, oh, sorry, I hope no one just was waiting to look at, watch that on. That was last time. Oh, okay, good. So Leighton Hewitt didn't just make it to the next round because he kind of thought about tennis a little bit, had a lecture on tennis, and maybe practiced 3 times. You're talking thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of practice. That's what it takes to be good at anything, right? You don't get good when you have 3 opportunities to practice a math problem. You just don't. It is a categorical impossibility. It just doesn't happen. Another outcome we know that is produced is something called endurance. So do you know the rate of attention deficit disorder diagnoses now? In the United States, it's 1 in 3 boys could actually be diagnosed or on their way to being diagnosed. We aren't evolving as a species to have something wrong with our neurology that's producing this as a real thing. It's not real. It's produced by the changes in our classrooms and the changes in what's happening in education, that more and more stuff's being exposed to kids with less time to master it. And when you're not good at something, you want to know what happens? You're distracted. Trust me, when I have to read some of the stuff I have to read for my continuing education stuff, the things I don't really connect with or I'm not good at, it's not my area, I'm daydreaming. I mean, I've read 5 pages and I'm like, have I been reading? It's just I have no idea where I've been, right? So when you're profoundly good at something, you have a crazy increased attention span, right? And you can produce that level of expertise with the right kind of training and with enough practice. And when you get fluency, kids aren't distracted. We set up all of our learning labs with open floor plans on purpose. And a lot of parents come in and they're like, oh my God, it is so loud in here. And this is crazy. And my child's never going to be able to function in this room. Well, we train under those conditions for a reason. Because if you have a fragile kid who needs perfect quiet, perfect temperature, perfect comfortable shirt with nothing itchy or bothering them, like a tag, anything, for a kid who's not fluent, anything will throw them off. like an itchy tag or they're just uncomfortable with everything, right? Well, if you have a kid like that, well, they are fragile and that is not a good prognosis. So we train in very distracting conditions. And what happens is when you get kids who are fluent, and I'm going to show you some clips, so I should just get to that, it is the most amazing thing to see because they don't hear it. They are dialed in. They don't notice the background noise at all. They do when they're first learning, but when they approach mastery and fluency, no distractions. And the last one is application, or using a skill in more complicated ways. And again, these aren't opinions or beliefs. These are scientifically proven outcomes that happen all the time. When you teach this way and allow kids to master skills to this level, it happens. It's not an opinion. So when you get kids profoundly fluent at math facts, like 50 a minute, you throw an advanced problem in front of them and give them a little concept instruction around solving it with like literally 1 minute of instruction around the concept of solving it. Bam, solved. They can apply skills with very little effort. And these are what we call performance standards. Like we want our teaching to have a standard. So our standard of performance is that the way we teach produces retention, endurance, and application with everything we teach. And we test it with every single kid to make sure we get it. Okay, so here's some cool clips.
Yeah, they're starting there. Show them what you got, girl. Here, Mark, get that card.
Okay, so that's a kid. I'm just going to pause this.
Good job.
Nope. How do I pause it? There. Okay. Okay, so that's just a little clip of a little gal who was on her way to having a dyslexia diagnosis. Couldn't read, first grade. They were already pretty much saying she needed to have books on tape because she'd never learned to read. Yes, and this happens all the time. 6, 7 years old, books on tape, just let's, not even try. So she came in, she had about 20 hours at that point. And that's a fluency test. She's passing that program of sounding out really basic words. So doing sound outs. So those were like segmenting and blending. So like app, cap, right? Op, chop, like that. So if you think about what a kid really needs to be good at when they're reading in the natural environment is like if they come across a word they don't know, sounding out needs to be an automatic repertoire, right? It can't be like cap. No. Cap. Oh, cap. 5 seconds. Half a second. Then they moved on down the road and they're still reading their passage, right? Well, that's how we do that. We don't get them good. You can't get kids good at sounding out when they're reading passages. So we isolate that skill on its own and get that fluency up so high and then test it in the natural environment. Test it in passages, test it with unknown words that she hasn't practiced, and it's generative, always. You train a small set of words like that, they can do it with any word if they've learned the rule of how to sound that word out, which is another part of the concept training. This is another really cool program that we use to train to auditory decoding, which is another really essential part of reading.
Kit.
It. Kit.
First. Vowel.
Short.
Why?
No easier.
Last. Word.
Kit.
Spell.
K-I-T.
Good. Set.
Set.
First. Last. Vowel. Long, short.
Short.
Why?
No easier.
Word.
Set.
Spell.
Okay, so there you go. So that's a program that allows kids to, because if you think about when you're sounding out a word, you're also your own listener, right? So like, think about early readers. Like they'll sound out a word, at ham. Like no correlation between the sound. I don't know if any of you have little kids, but that's the classic early reader stuff, right? Because they haven't learned how to hear sounds and identify a word from them. So we train it in both channels. So we train kids to be fluent segmenters, but they also have to hear sounds and be able to form words from them and do the opposite, hear a word, break them into sounds, identify the different parts of sounds that transform spelling. Okay, this is I want to get to a computational one.
Morningside math. Missing.
Okay, we'll show you this.
It's not all of them, but it's most of them. Missing number sheet. Okay, are you ready? So,
Let's start at a random row. Bam, that's the row you hate the most. That's the row we're going to start on. Hee hee hee.
Well, I don't need that one.
8, 11.
3,
5, 12.
7,
8, 12.
4,
Awesome. 7, 4.
11.
Awesome. You are in the game today, Ready boy. All right, 15 seconds. Tell me the missing number and go.
3, 11, 5, 7, 8, 4, 11, 4, 11, 4, 9, 5, 12, 6, 11,
Good.
4, 8,
Awesome.
7, 11, 10, 5, 7, 8,
Good.
4.
So that's a program that is kind of a component skill building for computation, where we train, when you're trained in addition and subtraction facts, if you train them all separately, there's 180 facts the kids need to be fluent in, like profoundly fluent, like that fluent. And that's a lot of facts. But if you train them as a fact family, like 3 numbers that go together to form 2 addition and 2 subtraction problems, well, you've just cut that down, you divided that by 4, right? Because they're learning 1 thing now, instead of having to memorize 4 things. So we train like 2, 2, 3, 5, 2, 4, 6, 2, 5, 7, 2, 6, 8, 2, 7, 9. And that's an exercise where one of those is missing from the family and they have to fill it in. And he was doing that at more than 1 a second. I think he got 28 in 15 seconds, which is really fast, right? That means it's a sight word. You want math facts to be sight words, just like sight words. You want to see 2 plus 4 and say 6, not 2 or 6. No, you want 6, right? So like snapping. All right, I should probably skip ahead.
What are we counting by?
This is cool, but oh, this is my son.
Ready? Get set, go.
I have to show Jack.
2, 5, 5, 6, 0, 3, 5, 0, 0, 0, 8, 0, 3, 0, 0, 4, 9, 1, 0, 2, 0, 5, 5.
Notice that those are, I'm going to skip this one. That's my son. I like to show my son because he's so cute. But just notice he was doing zeros, right? Adding and subtracting by zeros. But you have no idea how many kids, 7th graders, come in and they can't even fluently add and subtract by 0. So if you can't add and subtract by 0, you're not add and subtract by anything else. So we start there. So like a little 5-year-old comes in and we get them fluent at zeros, we get them fluent at ones, and then by the time they're in 1st grade, they've got that handled. Like getting kids doing this at really early ages solves a lot of problems because then you don't have to worry that the school's not helping them do this stuff. You handle it ahead of time, which is what we did. Still didn't help him master 20 decimal concepts in a week, but what are you gonna do? That just happened to him because now he's in 4th grade. Do I have time to do direct instruction? All right, I'm going to just talk to you quickly about, okay, so in our circle, so what you've just spent your time seeing is how we produce mastery, right? And it's all about timed practice of tiny little slices like an onion, tiny pieces, because another thing is, your child needs to master their addition and subtraction facts, do it. They're 180. What, are you going to do it all at once? No. Kids are never going to become fluent in 180 math facts at one time. So we slice them like you saw with Jack, like zeros, some ones, like slice, 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 slice. Master those, add some more. Master those, add some more. Master those, right? So it's not like it's not just about practicing. It's about the right kind of practice. Just like you'd never expect a tennis player to, who's never played tennis, to just do like an amazing lob, just out of the blue. No, it's about first you practice where you're standing, then you practice how you're holding your racket, then you practice setup, like that. Then you practice follow through, right? Pieces. Okay, so then there's the other part of this is concepts, which is so important. We are not rote learning people. Mastery and fluency does not mean it's rote at all. That's a really common misunderstanding, and that's what happened in education. Because all of a sudden drill and practice models became like, oh, that's rote learning, and they don't really understand. Right? So there's some truth to that because understanding something is different than fluent execution of it. You need both. So this is how we do both. So this is a little guy, you've seen him a couple times, who's mastering like a concept interaction around how to sound out certain words according to like phonetic rules. So like short vowels, long vowels. I don't know if you guys are familiar with all these things. But anyway, so this is how we would do that. This is how we train concepts. Okay, so first of all, tell me what your vowels are.
A, E, I, O, U.
Good. And what are the 2 things vowels have?
Name sound.
Names and sounds. Awesome. And if a vowel says its name, is it long or short?
Name. Long.
Good. And if it says its sound, is it long or short?
Short.
Good. And if there's an E at the end of a word, is it long or short?
Long.
Good. And if there's no E?
Short.
Good job. Awesome job. Now what happens when there's two consonants side by side and it makes a combined sound? What rule is that?
It combines. The consonant.
Yeah, the consonant blend rule. Good. And if you have two or more consonants side by side and they make one sound, what's that called?
Diagram.
A digraph. Awesome job. Good. Okay, so he didn't know this ahead of time, right? Like this was produced by timed, practiced oral interactions like this where we provided prompts and corrections on errors. Like if I said, you know, what happens when there's no E at the end of a word and he just sat there and stared at me? I'd say, the vowel says its name. So what's it say? Its name, right? So this is based on something called direct instruction, which I don't have a lot of time getting into, but it's another really important part of our methodology. Direct instruction is really based for classrooms, and unfortunately it's profoundly underused. It's actually been proven to be the #1 most effective educational practice ever by a study in the 1970s called Project Follow-Through. It profoundly outperformed every other methodology that was evaluated, and it was never implemented at a national level. And there's a lot of reasons why, and you can read a whole book on the crime that was called Project Follow-Through, what was it?
It's by Kathy Watkins.
Kathy Watkins. Anyway, it's really designed for classrooms so actually teachers are doing this in classrooms where there's a point-to-point correspondence between teacher talk and student talk. Because what happens when I'm doing to you right here now, some of you are sleeping or not, but I think a lot of you have component learning skills, so you're engaged. Oh God, but little kids, sorry, not so much. They are not fluent attenders yet. They're not fluent listeners. They're not. And they also have to respond to be reinforced and have that response strengthened. That's a principle of learning. You have to behave and be reinforced for that response to occur again. We've evolved as a species for that to happen. It's a law, right? That's how our brain works, really. So if kids are just sitting and teachers are blah, 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 blah. Okay, so, and what are vowels? And one kid raises their hand, the one who knows it and doesn't need feedback. Okay, Johnny, what are your vowels? A, E, I, O, U. Well, the rest of the kids, good. The rest of the kids are picking their noses or doodling or talking to Johnny or thinking about needing to pee or whatever, right? They're not engaged, and they definitely didn't say A, E, I, O, U and have a correct response reinforced. So direct instruction is based on one-to-one correspondence between teacher talk and choral responding in a classroom. So just like I'm doing with this little guy, teachers do actually in classrooms and have kids respond all the time. Guess what? Kids engage, they attend, they master skills like 50 times faster. And that's when ADHD diagnoses weren't on the rise, because kids were actually getting practice paying attention, not paying attention, which is all they practice all day long. The one kid who's paying attention and raising their hand, he's the last kid who actually needs to be called on. It's all the other kids who aren't doing that. So direct instruction, even though we use it to train our kids, it's really based for classrooms, and it's the most amazing thing. And I really recommend, if you're teachers, checking it out and telling your administration that you think that you should be doing this, because it really will transform your school. You'll be the best school in the country. That's all it takes, that one little thing. Even if you don't measure behavior this way, if you add direct instruction into your classroom, you will have the best school in Australia, without a doubt. So take that home with you. Okay, so now I got to get to outcome data, because I'm talking a big game up here, and this isn't made up. We actually have some data to suggest that what we're doing is really effective. So not only do we do we call them proximal progress monitoring, which means we chart and measure every single thing a kid does with us. We also measure what we call distal progress, or like distal goals. Because if I have a 7th grader who comes into me and is not reading well, and I have to put him back on phonics, well, parents are like, what the heck? He's in 7th grade and you're training him on his consonants and his vowel sounds? Are you crazy? Well, no. Well, and now, we've established ourselves and parents know we're not crazy, but when I was first very young and doing this, parents really thought I was nuts. So what's cool now is that we've collected all these outcome data to suggest that, yeah, because when you do that and you train all these pieces, guess what happens when they start moving to the 98th percentile at grade level? Even though we've never touched anything at grade level, we've only touched all these component skills, but they're moving to grade level in 90th percentile. So it's nice to have both. So we do measure distal goals, and we use something called curriculum-based measurement, which is this kind of norm-referenced measurement system in the US, and it's available in Australia. It's norm-referenced in America. It's not norm-referenced here yet, but people start using it, and I guarantee you they would bring their research here. So the people who developed curriculum-based measurement were influenced by Og Lindsley and precision teaching. And so they wanted to have an assessment tool that was easy for teachers to use based on count per minute and 1 minute timed samples. Because any teacher can really carve out half an hour, if they have 30 kids in a class, half an hour of 1 minute timed samples to take on every kid. And what you do is if you do that every week, and they actually have materials, and you test them once a week, and then you can put it in this database, and it creates this really cool chart, and it shows you what they should be on to be on track to be at grade level by the end of the school year. And if they're not on track, it says, uh-oh, make a change. And a teacher can kind of get with a team or get help, figure out what to do, right? So it's just really cool, and they have, they've done tons of research on this, so now they have percentile rankings based on count per minute scores, which is so cool. So like we know, like fifth graders need to read about 160 words a minute to be at the 90th percentile. And so like that's really awesome information to have. Okay, so that's what we use. In addition to that, we also do benchmark reassessments. So I'm going to show you really quick some outcome data from our offices and then link them up to the CBMs, and then I'm done. Do I have time?
You're fine.
Okay, good. Now, I want to be honest with you. This is a multiply graph. If I put this on remember what I showed you in the beginning? If I put this on an adding scale, these would look really big, and it would be a lie, right? So we're honest. We present our outcomes with respect to the mathematical model we should. So these are all about multiply factors, right? Which is why we're looking at 1, 10, 100, right? That's a pretty big spread, okay? So these are a bunch of learners in our New York offices from 2010 to 2014, and their progress on component skills in our phonemic awareness and reading program, all right? So blue bars are intake scores, okay? And then these orange bars are after 40 hours of instruction. And so what we're producing with these kids in 40 hours is a ×3 improvement on identifying phonic sounds, so that's 3 times better. 3 times better at understanding rules of phonics, so like how to sound words out according to rules, right? Because there are rules in how we sound words out. Some words are sight words, but a lot of words follow rules, and we train those. So ×3 better at that, ×4 better at sounding out words that are actually real, that exist in the English language, okay? But then we also test their ability, and this is sounding out advanced words, and see how this is lighter? None of these kids were directly trained to do this. That's a generative outcome, which we look for also. So what that means is these kids only had time, I'm forgetting which one I'm using, these kids only had time to have training in these basic level words, but we got a generative ×3 improvement on their ability to do it with advanced words, which is our point. That if you spend the time training component skills to fluency, you get free stuff. Like this is free stuff. We never had to train that. I like free stuff, right? Parents like free stuff too. Teachers love free stuff. When you have 45 kids screaming in your classroom, I think they would want a little bit of free stuff, right? Free stuff. So then we also train, certain kids we train with real words who don't know how to read at all. But some kids know how to read real words but they've memorized them. But they still can't sound out a word to save their lives, right? Because they've never learned to do that, and that's a real problem because when they come across a word that they've never had the opportunity to memorize, they have no idea how to read it. So they skip over it or whatever, guess, do sloppy stuff. So some of those learners go into a different program and they start learning how to sound out what we call nonsense words. So we've made up a bunch of funny, weird words that follow the same phonetic principles, but they're not real, right? So they learn how to read those, and ta-da, we also get a ×4 improvement on their ability to do it with untrained advanced words, right? So in 40 hours, we're getting all this stuff, which is kind of fast. That's a work week. right? And most of these kids came between 3 to 5 hours a week for services. Okay, so then this is their ability to automatically read words without sounding them out. So like now they're starting to kind of get better. Okay, now you just got to snap it. Like don't sound it out, just say it. So same kind of thing, trained, generative, like that. So these are all generative outcomes, that's why they're light. So this is simply improvements in comprehension as a function of improving reading fluency. We didn't train this ever. We just evaluated it. So for instance, kids at intake, this is their ability to retell a narrative passage that they read. So they're saying about 13 ideas a minute at intake. Without training it at all, just getting them to be better readers and read faster, they're saying 4 times more. So they're saying 50 ideas. They're remembering 50 things about the passage versus 13. That's amazing, in the same amount of time. That's amazing, right? And same thing with an expository passage, which is more like a fact-based, like social studies or science or same thing. This is a more traditional, just answer, and excuse me, you'll rarely see me use percent correct, but this test that we do is always in percent correct, so this is a percent correct graph. So kids at intake, without training comprehension ever, all we did was improve reading fluency. They went from 46% correct to 80% correct on answering comprehension questions, and 45% correct to 79% correct in 40 hours. So this is some math stuff, and I got to wrap this up. But we're getting the same kind of outcomes in math. These are core basic numeration targets. So counting, number line, understanding number line, place value, like number word conversions, things like that. So we're getting these kinds of gains in 40 hours. And this is gains in multiplication and division, recalling basic facts. So 5 times faster at kind of the first 30% of the facts. So remember, there's 180 facts. So we divide them into kind of 30% of facts mastered, 50% of facts mastered, 80% of facts, all facts mastered, okay? All facts fluent. So kids get through about 30% of our math facts. 50% they get about halfway through fluency building in 40 hours with us. But this is all generative. So they're also 3 times faster and 2 times faster at facts they haven't even practiced because they're just better at understanding how to multiply. And their processing speed's faster, visual attending's better. So that generates 2. And this is more advanced mathematics. So times 5s, times 3s, and times 12 better at long division. And I should have made these light bars, but these are all generative. None of that was trained. This is all a function of fluency in basic math. We simply gave them a rule around how to solve these problems, and they did it because they were fluent in their math facts, right? Okay, so now these are the CBM measures. I'm sorry, here we go. So this is this cool database you can use if you're a teacher and you want to start doing this. You can actually put your kids' scores into a database and it automatically generates this graph for you, even though I don't like it because it's not multiply, but that's okay, it's something. So this is just showing you a kid at FIT in grade 1 reading who started with us below the 5th percentile for her grade level. So she was reading only better than 5% of first graders. And in 40 hours, she moved to the 84th percentile for her reading rate. So she moved from not even reading a word a minute, because she couldn't read this level at all, to reading about 128 words a minute in 40 hours. And that's a novel, untrained, not practiced passage. This is a comprehension assessment that CBM gives us. So again, below the 25th percentile, she couldn't do anything on this assessment. And she moved to the 98th percentile on a comprehension measure in 40 hours as a function of just improving her reading fluency. This is a little guy who started homeschool with us, below the 1st percentile for math computation. And after homeschool, 85th percentile. And this is his 4th grade, so we moved him up a grade level. About 5 months after he started homeschool, he was able to move up he had moved a grade in 4 months. And by the end of homeschool, he was in the 98th percentile for his grade level. And then he went back to school and was in the 90th percentile. And now the kid is like a math whiz. Okay, and so this is the last one. So this is a summary figure of our CBM outcomes in 40 hours, our kind of those benchmark assessments I showed you for individual learners. Now this is like a summary graph of those. So there are 4 different CBMs we look at here. So we have concepts and application, which is like word problem, solving problems. Then we just have basic computation, which is like solving math facts. This is a comprehension assessment, and this is just oral reading fluency. These first bars on all of them are the average rate of improvement for kids in the school district nationally, just in schools without FIT, and these are our improvements. So in 40 hours, we're producing about 8 times faster growth in solving word problems and doing problem solving with math. And you know what's amazing about that? Not a single one of these kids received any training in that. They only got core math. And you know what these kids do all day long? This. All these kids do all day long is that kind of crazy advanced math, problem solving, word problems, using figures, bar graphs, you know, all that crazy stuff. And they're moving that much. We don't even train it, and we get 8 times better growth, which is the point I'm making about component skill fluency matters. Because these kids aren't getting component skill fluency. They're only getting trained, you know, they're getting exposed to all these advanced math concepts, but it's not helping them. These kids aren't getting training in advanced math concepts, and they're doing it on their own because they're fluent in their math facts. This is computation, so like just solving basic algorithms. We're about 4 times better at that. We're about 4 times better at them doing comprehension in 40 hours, and we're 7 times, almost 6 times better at producing, at reading, changing reading fluency rates. So the point is that when you measure in a precise manner with your kids, and you give them practice in fluency building in core skill areas, and then you test their movement towards a distal goal, you get it without having to train it. You get it, like this is all free stuff. And we like free stuff, right? And I am done now. Sorry, I think I overshot my window.
Wow. I was just thinking that it was, I think it was about, Kim will know the number, but sometime in November in 2014, and I walked up to this lady and said, I really need help for my daughter. In the process, I got the ability to transform lives of kids that I work with. And, it's an extraordinary gift to know these people. I'm telling you, these people are the most dedicated, passionate people you'll ever meet. And the biggest thing? This woman cries 20 times a day. She looks at these kids that everybody gives up on. And I'm telling you, kids come to us, and I've been to New York and spent a month in their office, and kids that end up at that place everybody has given up on. And these kids become extraordinary children. And I have the privilege to be able to bring that to Perth and to Australia, and I just feel so honoured and so privileged. I wanted to say briefly, it was 12 months ago that I first took my daughter to Dr. Kim. She had a million cases that she could have taken, but for some reason she opened the door to my daughter. And back then, my daughter was falling asleep at the table. She didn't know how to learn. She was a rote learner. And I want to say for you that I spent more than $1 million at that point to get her to that point. And in a year, I saw Dr. Kimberly assess her yesterday, and she almost mastered her phonetic sequence of oral review rules that you just saw there. It's astounding. My daughter has severe autism. But this is possible for every single child that we work with. And it doesn't happen fast for everyone, but for some, like I saw a little girl that came to us 2 days ago, and the school has given up on her. They don't know what to do with her. They told her parents yesterday that she might be able to make materials in a classroom one day. You know what Dr. Nick told me yesterday? She's going to be done by the end of the year. She'll never need any help again. And everybody's given up on her. So I just am profoundly grateful. I spent 10 years knocking on a lot of doors, and then I knocked on theirs, and it changed my life, and I'm so privileged to work with them. I want to thank them so much for coming all the way to New York to help us do this in Australia. I've got an amazing team of people that are going to help me change the face of education in this country, and I'll be doing that for the rest of my days. So thank you so much, Dr. Kim and Dr. Nick, for an amazing presentation.